Snow draped the quiet city like a heavy blanket, muting every sound except the faint hum of streetlights and the low whistle of wind between mansion walls. Inside one of those grand homes sat Richard Cole, a man who had once commanded every room he entered. 49 years old, paralyzed from the waist down after a car accident, he now lived as a ghost among his own possessions. The fire in the marble hearth burned bright, yet he felt no warmth. His chest rose and fell slowly, eyes fixed on the swirling snow outside his tall window. Before we dive into today's story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Each week we share emotional and thought-provoking stories that remind us how compassion still exists in the world. Your support helps these stories reach more people who believe kindness can change lives. Now, before we begin, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your country or city in the comments below. It's amazing to see people from different corners of the world connected through storytelling. 20 years earlier, reporters had called him the man who built half the city. He had built empires from numbers, bought politicians with charm, and measured success by the weight of silence in a boardroom after he spoke. But life had its ways of rebalancing power. A single night on a rain-slick bridge had turned ambition into memory. The crash left him broken, and everything afterward, his company, his wife, his so-called friends, drifted away. It was supposed to be another ordinary evening, the caretaker gone home early, the alarms blinking red at every entrance, the dinner untouched on the table. Yet the loneliness felt sharper tonight, heavy enough to imagine voices in the corners. He reached for the wine glass balanced on the arm of his wheelchair and caught sight of his reflection in the black window. Silver hair, drawn cheeks, and eyes dulled by too much thinking. Somewhere beyond that glass was a streetlight flickering in the distance. Then came the knock. He froze. It was soft. 3 gentle taps on the servant's side door. He checked the clock. Past midnight. No one visited him unannounced. Not anymore. He waited, thinking it might be wind against wood, but the knock came again, slightly louder, persistent. Cautious curiosity stirred him. He turned the chair, its tires whispering against the polished floor, and moved down the long corridor. Every sound magnified, the tick of clocks, the protest of pipes, the hiss of the fire fading behind him. When he reached the door, he hesitated, hand hovering above the lock. "Who's there?" His voice sounded rough, unused. No answer, only the cold leaking through the frame. He undid the latch. The instant the door cracked open, a current of freezing air swept in, and with it a small figure. A girl stood beneath the porch light, maybe 6 or 7 years old, dark skin glistening with melting snowflakes. Her coat was thin and too short for her growing arms. Snow clung to her curls like tiny stars. She looked up at him without fear. "Sir," she said, her voice small but clear over the wind, "I'm hungry. Do you have any food left over?" For a long moment Richard could only stare. The contrast was almost surreal. This tiny girl shivering against the storm, and behind him a hallway lined with paintings worth more than most houses. "How did you get here?" he asked at last. She shrugged. "I live down the street. Mama's working late. She said rich people always have extra food, so I thought I'd ask." Something twisted in his chest. No one had spoken to him that plainly in years. Even his staff used softened voices, careful not to stir the sleeping anger grief had left behind. This child looked right into his eyes, as if he were just another man. "I could give you some," he said, trying to sound distant. "But you shouldn't be walking alone at this hour." Her small shoulders lifted again. "Mama says miracles don't wait for daylight." He frowned, uncertain what that meant, but moved aside. "Come in before you freeze." The faint smell of snow and street dust clung to her as she stepped onto the polished floor. She glanced around in quiet wonder, at the gold-trimmed frames, the gleaming chandeliers, but her awe held none of the greedy fascination he was used to seeing in adults. It was simple curiosity, full of life. He rolled toward the kitchen. "What's your name?" "Jasmine," she said quickly. "Jasmine," he repeated, opening the refrigerator. He pulled out a plate covered with foil, roast chicken, untouched. "You can have this." She looked at the food but didn't move closer. "I can't take it for free." He gave a short laugh, rough and humorless. What could you trade for it? Jasmine thought for a moment, then her face brightened with the disarming sincerity only children own. A miracle. He blinked. A miracle? Her nod was solemn. You give me your leftovers and I'll give you one. He couldn't help it. Laughter escaped him, dry but real. You think you can make miracles happen? Yes, she said without hesitation. Mama says kindness makes miracles. Her confidence amused him even as it stung. Then I suppose I'm in for some magic tonight. He pushed the plate toward her. Eat. She climbed onto a stool, careful not to spill crumbs, every bite measured, grateful. Watching her, he realized something unnerving. He couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to him without expectation, without calculation. Even charity organizations that once sought his donations had stopped calling after he stopped writing checks. But here was a child who saw him first as a man, not a millionaire or a cripple. When she finished, she looked up, eyes bright again. Do your legs hurt? He stiffened. They don't feel anything anymore. Then maybe that's what needs fixing. She jumped down from the stool, her tiny sneakers squeaking softly on the floor. Before he understood what she intended, she pressed her small hand near his knee, palm warm against the fabric of his trousers. Hey, he said sharply, startled. It's okay, she murmured. Mama says sometimes you have to touch what's broken to help it heal. Her words sounded absurd, yet they carried a weight that silenced him. The warmth of her hand spread not through his legs, but through the hollow space behind his ribs. Something flickered, an old ache, an unfamiliar hope. When she stepped back, she smiled, the faint gaps between her baby teeth showing. Tomorrow, you'll remember what miracles feel like. He wanted to laugh again, but the impulse died quietly. And if I don't, then maybe you'll make one for somebody else, she replied simply. That was all. She thanked him, pulled her flimsy coat tight, and left before he could say another word. He sat there long after the wind swallowed her footsteps, staring at the footprints melting on his marble floor. For years, time had moved through his days like fog, shapeless and grey. But now, surrounded by silence, something inside him shifted, so subtle he almost missed it. A faint ringing filled his ears, a pressure behind his chest, a pulse in his legs he thought long gone. Every muscle tensed at once. His breath caught, disbelief flashing across his face. Then it faded, quick as it came, and left behind a single impossible thought. What if she was right? By morning, Richard wondered if he had imagined everything, the warmth, the sudden pulse, even the strange peace that followed. The memory of the little girl's voice, clear and fearless, lingered like the echo of a song he couldn't stop humming. It was absurd, he told himself. Miracles didn't happen in real life, especially not to people like him. Still, when he rolled into the kitchen and saw the empty plate, the crumbs she had left behind, he felt something stir that had been dead for years. Outside, daylight spilled over the snow, turning the streets into rivers of light. He hadn't looked out there properly in a long time. For once, he turned his chair toward the window, not toward his own reflection, and watched the people walking below. Couples, children bundled in bright scarves, delivery drivers splashing through slush. The world wasn't pausing for him. It never had. But he realized with quiet surprise that he didn't want to be invisible today. A knock jolted him from his thoughts, not loud, more a polite tap against the window glass. For a heartbeat, his chest lifted with hope, but it was only his housekeeper, Janine, who had returned for her morning shift. She was a sturdy woman in her early 60s, with a kind face that life had made cautious. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," she said as she removed her gloves. "You're up earlier than usual." "Couldn't sleep," he replied, trying to sound casual. "You ever meet a little girl named Jasmine Thompson? Lives near here." Janine frowned. "Can't say I have. Why do you ask?" "She came by last night, said she lived down the street." "You let someone in this house in the middle of the night?" Her voice leapt to alarm. "Sir, that's dangerous. This neighborhood isn't exactly—" She hesitated, choosing words as delicately as a knife. "Isn't what?" he pressed. She sighed. "Safe. That's all I mean. You can't be too careful with certain parts of town moving closer every year. Some of those people will say anything for money or pity." The vague phrasing clung in the air, ugly and cowardly. He realized what she hadn't wanted to say. Those people. The words stung more than expected. She wasn't lying, he said sharply. She was hungry. Janine tightened her lips, not meeting his gaze. Maybe so, but maybe it wasn't just food she was after. That will be all, he said, voice slicing any further conversation. Later, when she left, the mansion felt emptier but clearer, like the silence had a new kind of meaning. He wheeled toward the hallway, where the door still bore faint wet fingerprints from the night before, as though her presence hadn't fully departed. Something about those prints felt sacred. He couldn't stop thinking about her words. Tomorrow you'll remember what miracles feel like. At noon another knock sounded, this time louder, confident. He hurriedly turned down the corridor, and there she was again. Snow sparkled in her hair like morning frost, her smile bright despite the cold. "Hello, Mr. Cole," Jasmine chirped. "I brought you something." She held out a small paper bag folded tight at the top. Inside was stale bread and 2 sugar cookies cracked from the morning chill. "Mama baked these last night for the hospital staff. I saved some for you." He blinked, speechless. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she said simply, setting the bag on the table. Her eyes lingered on his wheelchair. "Did your legs feel funny today?" The question startled him, but he answered, "Maybe a little." "Why do you ask?" "I told you." "The miracle's starting," she said with childlike certainty. He almost smiled, but stopped himself. "Miracles don't happen so easily. Sometimes," she said quietly, "people stop seeing them before they start." Something about that line hit deeper than she could ever know. He cleared his throat. "Does your mother know you're here?" "She will soon," Jasmine admitted. "She works a lot. But she says when someone shows you kindness, you should always return it." Her voice softened the air around them, its rhythm almost musical. Without meaning to, he found himself asking questions. Where she went to school, her favorite color, what she wanted to be when she grew up. "A doctor," she said proudly. "Then I can fix people who forget what feeling alive means." Before he could reply, the front door burst open. A woman's voice echoed through the foyer, sharp with worry. "Jasmine!" The woman stepped inside, breath misting in the cold air, tall, graceful even in exhaustion, her nurse's scrubs visible under her winter coat. Her eyes flicked from Jasmine to Richard, suspicion and fear swirling together. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly, pulling her daughter close. "Sir, she should not be bothering you." "It's all right," Richard interrupted gently. "She wasn't bothering me." The woman frowned. "You don't understand. It's not safe for her to be wandering into strangers' homes, especially at night. Not everyone means well when a black child knocks on their door." The truth behind her words hit him like a slow punch. He'd never thought of himself as dangerous to anyone, yet he felt the weight of what she implied the world could be. "Mrs. One," he began. "Margaret Thompson," she said firmly. "Mrs. Thompson, I meant no harm." She was hungry. "I gave her food. She told me," Margaret replied, her voice starting to soften. "I just had to see for myself." Her gaze swept across the mansion, the marble floors, the portraits, the smell of coffee somewhere beyond. "It's hard to believe kindness lives in places like this anymore." "I stopped believing too," he confessed, "until your daughter knocked last night." Those words silenced them. Something changed in her expression. Some guarded part of her heart eased slightly. She exhaled. "Well, thank you then." Jasmine tugged her sleeve. "Mama, he's nice." "You can tell." Margaret gave a tired smile. "I can tell he's lonely." "Lonely and lucky," Richard replied softly. "Your daughter has a light most people spend their whole lives looking for." The honesty behind his tone caught Margaret off guard. She stared at him for a long moment before saying, "Maybe she sees what others don't." Jasmine giggled. "Told you so." As they turned to leave, Richard felt an unexpected panic rise within him, the kind that comes when something good might vanish too quickly. "Come back sometime," he said, almost pleading. "There's always food here." Margaret hesitated. "Maybe," she said carefully. Then she glanced down at Jasmine. "Say goodbye, sweetheart." "Goodbye doesn't mean forever," the girl said with a grin, waving as they stepped out into the sunlight. The door closed, cutting off the brightness. Yet somehow the mansion didn't feel as dark as before. For the first time in years, Richard wheeled himself toward the piano in the corner of the room. Dust covered half the keys. He touched one gently. The note rang out sharp, trembling, imperfect, and alive. He smiled. Later that evening, as the fire burned low, a faint pressure pulsed in his right leg again. He froze, leaning forward in disbelief. The twitch returned, so small it might have been imagination, but he felt it. His laugh startled even him, breaking the long, stagnant quiet. Maybe the girl was right after all. Maybe miracles start when someone hands you back a piece of your own heart. That night, Richard barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, fragments of the day replayed in flashes. The first knock, Jasmine's bold smile, Margaret's wary eyes softening before she left. The mansion seemed to hum faintly with something unfamiliar, life. He woke before dawn, rolled himself to the window and sat watching another slow snowfall. The city was quiet but full of movement. Delivery vans, pedestrians bundled in coats, a pair of children dragging sleds down the street. He realized he hadn't watched people like this in years. He had only observed without seeing. The thought settled heavy in his chest. How many lives had passed outside his window while he mourned his own? What had he missed hiding inside his wealth behind curtains and gates? He rubbed his hands together, another habit he had forgotten, and told himself he would start the day differently. At breakfast, he asked Janine for orange juice instead of coffee. She raised an eyebrow. "Feeling adventurous today?" He smiled faintly. Something like that. But Janine wasn't finished with yesterday's argument. "Sir, about that girl. I spoke with the gate guard. He says security never saw anyone come or go. Maybe you should let me handle these things. Sometimes needy families will—" "Enough," Richard interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "She wasn't here to take anything. She gave something back." Janine blinked, confused. "What could a child possibly give you?" He looked past her, toward the flicker of the fire. "A reason to open the door again." She said nothing more, though her skeptical look lingered as she turned away. The hours crept by. At noon, a knock sounded again. For reasons he couldn't explain, his pulse quickened. Not fear, anticipation, but when he reached the door, it was someone different. Margaret, her coat zipped to her chin against the chill. Jasmine stood beside her, holding a folded blanket with clumsy pride. "I know we said goodbye," Margaret began, "but Jasmine insisted we bring you this. It's just something she made in school." Jasmine unfolded the blanket, its uneven squares of colored fabric bright against the gray air. "It's for your legs," she said, "to keep them warm until they wake up again." For a moment, Richard couldn't speak. The patchwork looked like sunlight stitched together by tiny fingers. He placed it gently across his lap. "It's perfect," Margaret's expression softened. "She does this for her patients sometimes, well, my patients. Brings them drawings or little gifts. Says it helps them heal faster." "Maybe she's right," he murmured. Jasmine looked up at him. "Are they still sleeping?" He smiled. "A little less than before." Margaret's eyes flickered at his words. She must have sensed something in his tone that wasn't a simple joke. "If that's true," she said slowly, "I'm happy for you." They stayed for tea at his invitation. Conversation flowed easier this time. Margaret spoke of her long hours at the hospital, how she balanced night shifts and single motherhood. He found himself listening not out of obligation, but genuine curiosity. Every detail about her life pulled him further from his own isolation. When Jasmine darted off to explore the hallway, Margaret leaned back, exhaling. "You know," she said, "I almost didn't let her come back. I've seen too many people twist kindness into something cruel." He nodded. "The world isn't kind to trust anymore. That's why it shocked me when she told me how you listened. She said you looked at her like she mattered. Most folks don't even look at kids like mine." Her words landed heavy. He realized with quiet shame how many times in his life he had looked through people rather than at them. The waiters, the drivers, even charity recipients he had once written checks for without remembering their names. "Maybe I'm finally learning to see," he said. The afternoon light shifted on the walls, warm and gold. Jasmine returned, dragging a book she'd found on his shelf. "What's this about?" she asked, holding it up. Richard smiled at the irony. "It's about building bridges." The girl flipped a few pages filled with sketches and blueprints. "Did you build any?" "Too many," he said softly, "but not the kind that matter most." That evening after they left, something extraordinary happened. While adjusting the blanket on his lap, his right foot shifted again, this time stronger, deliberate. A shiver ran up his spine. Then a flicker from the other leg. It wasn't imagination. He could feel pressure, sensation, faint but real. Tears welled in his eyes before he even realized it. He called his old doctor the next morning. The man sounded skeptical, but agreed to run a few tests. Hours later, after inspecting X-rays and reflex responses, the doctor simply muttered, "I don't know how to explain this." "I can move them," Richard replied in disbelief. "It's faint, but it's there." "Well," the doctor said finally, "sometimes the body surprises us, but this defies what we know about nerve recovery." Richard laughed, a sound that filled the sterile office like the first chord after years of silence. "Maybe it's not my body that's waking up." That weekend he called Margaret and asked if they would come for dinner. At first she hesitated. Pride stiffened her tone. "You don't owe us anything," she said. "I know," he replied, "but maybe I owe myself the chance to thank you properly." When they arrived, the mansion no longer felt like a fortress. He had lit candles, played soft jazz through speakers long unused. Jasmine darted excitedly from room to room, admiring the shiny surfaces and tall windows that reflected their laughter. "Everything smells nice," she said, as he rolled to the table. "That's because it's simple," he chuckled. "Just stew and bread. To nothing fancy." "Fancy isn't what miracles eat," she declared solemnly, making Margaret laugh for the first time that night. They shared stories, laughter, even comfortable silences. By dessert, the mansion felt different, less like a tomb, more like a home. Then, as they readied to leave, Jasmine turned back at the doorway. "Can I come see you tomorrow?" "Of course," Richard said. "If your mom agrees." Margaret smiled faintly. "We'll see." The door closed gently, but the warmth stayed behind. He sat there, breathing it in, the sound of chairs being pushed back, the echo of childish footsteps in marble halls, the simple music of life returning. Later, when he went to bed, he dreamed not of walking yet, but of standing at the window, snow melting beneath his bare feet, sunlight on his face. 2 weeks later, during another physiotherapy session, he finally stood, only for seconds, gripping parallel bars, but long enough for the nurse to gasp and call others in. As he looked out the clinic window toward the pale winter sky, he thought of Jasmine's small hand on his knee, of her impossible certainty, and he whispered, half in laughter, half in prayer, "Trade leftovers for a miracle. Guess we both got our deal."